Your Majesty, Your Beatitude, my lords, excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Cambridge Centre for Palestine Studies, Cambridge, England, UK, where we shall be hosting within the framework of our interview series program about the Gaza Strip and Palestine in general. One of our main leading academics and professionals, Dr. Atif Kubursi. Dr. Atif Kubursi is a well-known economist. He has served on numerous boards and international organizations at the UN. And in addition to his PhD in economics in 1972, he was also a senior visiting scholar here at Cambridge, where we sit at the moment in England. Obviously, on top of his 250 papers on the subject, in addition to at least 12 books authored by Professor Atif Kubursi. Professor Atif Kubursi is a well-known scholar and figure. He has been drafting and mastering strategies, especially in economic developments and in particular about Asia. He speaks Arabic, French, English, and possibly other languages. He knows the region quite well, and he recently authored quite a powerful paper titled "The Genocide Has Got Other Economic Factors," and it in particular focuses on routes such as trade routes and gas and natural resources. Professor Atif Kubursi, I hope that I haven't introduced you briefly enough, although we can talk about your CV quite a lot. You have obviously been teaching as well at various universities. Your PhD is from Purdue University. You are an emeritus professor at McMaster University in Canada, but chiefly you are as well quite a senior, well-known international consultant on these issues of economics and development. So without further ado, could I kindly ask you to furnish us with your thesis about the economics of genocide in the Gaza Strip in Palestine, after which we can discuss the matter at length. Please, the podium and screen are yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. Makram, for this generous introduction. My mother would have been very proud of you for being so generous. I am humbled by the way you've really introduced me. The issue here that I'm talking about is one that puzzled me. I don't know of any colonial event or mechanism or system that did not exploit, did not have an economic benefits or objectives. And I was digging into what might really explain this relentless barbaric attack on the Palestinians for now more than 3 months that has killed over 24,000. As we're talking, the number is rising, and have wounded over 60,000, destroyed 70 to 80% of the infrastructure, from houses, from schools, from hospitals, from churches, some of them as old as maybe second oldest in the world, and mosques. The issue here is, are there any economic objectives? Especially that the Israelis are seeking to empty, to flatten, to erase Gaza, to disperse its people, to empty it, make it a place where people cannot live becomes a basically unlivable space. And this was not made, statements made by isolated people, but was made by ministers in the Israeli government. Why would Israel seek to empty Gaza? And why is this perhaps not fully explained by the Zionist ideology of grabbing land, of ethnic cleansing? There must be something else. And I have in studying the economic benefits that Israel has been able to reap from its occupation. Occupation of Palestine has been very profitable for the Israelis. To a great extent, some of the studies by UNCTAD, of which I was a contributor, have shown that Israel derives substantial benefits from this occupation. Even some have really gone as far as estimating it to be in excess of 11, 12% of the Israeli GDP is derived from that non-benign and brutal occupation. And I think that this, in my view, has always been an underestimate, because somehow, sometimes we only look at a few aspects. But if you try to estimate the resource transfer, whether it's of water, oil, gas, and some of the most fertile agricultural land that had been occupied and commandeered by the Israelis, one would find that this economic benefits have been important considerations. So the issue that I had faced and the question I raised, why would Israel seek to empty Gaza? Are there any economic objectives that can explain this? And I was able to see at least three, and there are really possible two more that I didn't discuss, but I could really mention. But the three were so lucrative, so to speak, so meaningful, that it really earned my attention and thought that I should study it further. First and foremost, recently there was a discovery of oil and gas in the Levant Basin. And this Levant Basin extends over 85,000 square kilometers that would go from Egypt through Palestine, through Israel and Lebanon, and going to Syria and to Cyprus. The Levant basin had about 122 trillion cubic feet of gas, 1.7 billion barrels of oil. And this resource, whether it's oil or the gas, straddles many political borders. These resources are underground. They do not obey political borders. They are shared resources, are part of what we call in economics the global commons. And what this means that not a single country can claim them. They belong to the collective of countries that front on the Mediterranean. Israel was not too happy with that. They tried as much as possible, and there is enough evidence, and I will go through some of the evidence I was able to unearth about trying to deny the Palestinians of the natural gas that is about 20 nautical miles from their shore. And Marine 1, they're known, and Marine 2. And as I said, that this is shared resource. I won't tell you how many cubic trillions of cubic feet are there, because part of this gas is fugitive. It could move. And part of it is in that common aquifer, so to speak, in this common wells, that if one party were to use it, it would deny the other. It's literally an issue that the Americans had faced when they discovered oil in Texas and Oklahoma. And everybody wanted to drill and lift some of this oil up to the ground, and then they found out that this would really mean a dissipation of the natural flow that would have lifted this resource to the ground. So they decided that the best way to deal with it is to unitize, and they were aided by a theorem called Coase theorem by Ronald Coase that argued and got Nobel Prize for it, that you should separate the use and exploitation of a common resource from the ownership. What you do is you unitize these and you lift that oil at the most optimum place where you could use the natural flow forces, and then you put the money in escrow and you divvy it up in proportion to the property rights. Because if you allowed each group to lift it, the net profit of each group summed up would be substantially below what you could get if you were collectively able to exploit it. And many people are saying that this common resource in the Mediterranean should be treated exactly the same way, and that each party should have a claim in proportion to its property rights. And I even argued some really interesting consideration here is that these resources take 10,000 years to accumulate. And therefore, it's not how much frontage you have. You also have to really look at the historical things. Israel probably in the region is about 75 years, and maybe even historically was not 70. Palestinians have been there for thousands of years. So on one dimension, you look at the geographical one, but on the vertical axis, you look at time. And if you really look at these two coordinates, the Palestinians have more claim to these resources, shared resources, higher than anybody else. Palestinians are historic people, been in the region for thousands of years. But the story short is that if we allow Israel to use these resources, they will diminish what's available to the Palestinians, to the Lebanese, to the Syrians, to the Cypriots, and to the Egyptians. And what's even worse, this resource is not only finite, which means if you take one party, take more, there will be less for others. It's also non-renewable. There's no chance of replenishing this resource. So to a great extent, one has to be very careful and make sure that equity and efficiency require that there will be common exploitation and a just and equitable way of distributing it. What does this mean? This resource now has become extremely more valuable. At all 2017 prices before the Ukraine-Russian war, I estimated this to be in the neighborhood of about $450 billion. But now, natural gas has become far more expensive. The destruction of Nord Stream 2, and we all know who probably done it, has now made it impossible for Europe to get access to Russian gas. And they're all looking towards the Mediterranean to make up for this, because they were trying to get some of the fracking from the US, but it was about 4 times more expensive than what they were able to get it from the Russians. So to a great extent now, the natural gas value has gone up, maybe 2.5 times, 3 times more than it used to be in 2017. And what's even more important is that nobody knows how long this natural gas is going to last. I just said it's non-renewable, non-replenishable. If you keep digging and lifting up, less is going to be available in the future. So whoever gets it now is in a very fortunate position. And what's happening is today, this common resource that belongs to all these countries is only exploited by the Israelis and denying the others. So what they've done, and I've documented this in my paper, is that the Israelis at one time were, Ehud Barak, for example, in 2007 and even before, were trying to see if that gas that belonged or in the economic zone of Gaza could be bought by the Israelis and piped into Ascalon and used by the Israeli electricity company and paid the Palestinians $4 billion. This would be investment in peace, so to speak. And then the Palestinians could now depend on their own natural resources and do not have to depend on international aid. But what the Sharon and others, and today the whole resource is totally commandeered, and there is no question in my mind that they are exploiting it and denying the Palestinians the fruits of this against what international law and the Geneva Convention would say, that the occupier has no right to exploit resources belonging to the occupied people unless it is used to help the occupied. But now what the Israelis are doing are siphoning up slant drilling directly and moving it to their own territory without giving benefits to the Palestinian people, to the occupied people, to the very poor, the poorest of the poor in the region, the people of Gaza and the Palestinians. So the story of the gas is one that would definitely give incentive to the Israelis to keep a hold on Gaza, to deny the Gazans, to deny the Palestinians, despite all the agreements that they were able to reach before 2007, they're completely scrapped. And the Palestinians are losing billions of dollars by being denied access. And the only way you could guarantee this complete command and control over this is to make sure there's no Palestinian entity that could vie with the Israelis or compete with them to occupy. So this was one resource that I considered to be crucial incentive for the Israelis in going into Gaza and making sure they control this resource and deny the Palestinian any possible, because the Palestinians during the early 2000 when they were discovered, they already gave British Gas the right to go and exploit this and the money they could receive themselves. Actually, Arafat went and one time and light a spout to show that the gas is already being lifted and there exists gas. And now you see the situation is Gaza, if it doesn't have any legitimate control and any effective control, and it's taken by the Israelis, you'll be in a very difficult situation that denies this generations of Palestinians from the fruits of exploitation of natural resources that belong legitimately and under international law and under any law to the people of Palestine. But if this is not enough, let's talk about two other very important projects that both of them ultimately would argue that Israel needs to empty Gaza for this. And they're seeking this basically to make sure that these mega projects that had come on the drawing board be implemented. One is the Ben Gurion Canal. The Ben Gurion Canal was conceived and came a option that the Israelis were seeking, prodded by the Americans, by the way. And this is during 1960 when Nasser, in 1956, nationalized successfully the Suez Canal. The U.S. had a secret, document and study by an engineering firm that tendered another parallel canal that goes from Aqaba and on the Red Sea all the way to the Mediterranean. At that time, they were thinking of going to Ascalon. But then they found out that this is not the shortest way. Even going to Ascalon and creating this new canal that would compete with the Suez Canal would remain under the threat from, in their view, of the Palestinian guns. It's so close to them. And it's going to be in a geological area which is quite sandy. And one of the issues with the Suez Canal that it is in a sandy area, and it's narrow and it's not deep enough and needs continuous dredging. And the continuous dredging means that you need high cost of maintenance and to operate it. And one thing about the Suez Canal, it's about 190 kilometers long. It's narrow, it's 100 meters. And this means that traffic going from the south to north would have to be excluding any traffic coming from the north south. There is only one way traffic. The Suez Canal is conceived to be 200-meter wide, which means there could be two-way traffic. So you don't have to wait until the ships travel from the south to the north. The two ways could be used simultaneously. Second, it's deeper. And being near Gaza or through Gaza, it will be in the rocky geological structure, which means it needs less maintenance. It will be deeper, wider, and less maintenance. To a great extent, these were superb factors to consider and incentives for creating it. But more importantly, if you are able to empty Gaza, you'll have full control. The issue here is that the viability and the advantages of the Ben Gurion Canal would only become realistic and implementable only to the extent that you can go through Gaza and prevent Gazans from exercising any sovereignty or natural national power to share or to prevent the Israelis from exploiting it. It seems to another reason, if it's so deep and so wide, it will take larger ships. And the Americans and the Europeans, and now as they want to control the Pacific and they see China as an emerging contestant and trying to emasculate or reduce and constrain the vitality and the projection of power of the Chinese, they need to move naval assets that are large. And you know, the Suez Canal literally saves 4,000 nautical miles. If you take a line from Mumbai in India all the way to London, it's about 7,000 nautical miles. If you have to go through around Africa, around South Africa, it's more than 11,000 nautical miles. So you literally, and it could get worse when you go to Greece or you go to Italy and you go to Germany and other places. So to a great extent, it saves around 3 weeks of sailing. It reduces the cost by over 30%. People right now, with some of the problems of having to go through the Red Sea and the altercation with the Yemenis, they are paying a much higher bill to deliver these goods and services. And you know, the Suez Canal, 12% of the world trade goes through, and 30% of the container trade, billions of dollars. And it also is a main thoroughfare to transport not only Chinese and Indian products and Japanese products to Europe and other places. It is also a main passageway for energy from the Gulf into the European markets. The oil from Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and UAE and Oman all passes through this. Maybe about 20% of total traded energy is going through this canal. So to a great extent, the Israelis are trying to float this. And in 2021, they were even declaring they're going to start the implementation of this canal. I don't know how the Egyptians have looked at this and have not challenged it. I mean, this would totally, if not in a fundamental way, undermine the Suez Canal. Suez Canal is about 2% of the Egyptian GDP. Last year, no, 2021, actually, the latest numbers, they made $9.4 billion through the fees, through passage fees that go. So to a great extent, the Israelis are vying to take this away from Egypt and to give this full control of that major uh, trade route passage away from Egyptian control to a control that maybe Egypt one day might go with the Russians or with the Chinese and would allow this, and they want really to have the veto power, and this veto power to be exercised only by the US, Israel, and the Europeans. So to a great extent, people have not valued or have taken as serious as they should the attempt on the part of the Israelis is to create an alternative to Suez Canal. There is on the drawing map pictures that the Israelis have conceived of their plans of major tourist cities all along the canal, just as much as the Panama Canal have been exploited in this direction. So to a great extent here, I cannot, for the life of me, as an economist who believes that economic factors are very important motivation for people and for nations, to completely dismiss, to disregard the importance of this project for the Israelis and for the parties that are supporting them. I was also surprised how come the Americans, the Europeans, who have stood so vehemently on the side of Ukraine and have condemned Russia for invading it, are completely silent and totally oblivious to the plight. And then okay, give you just one single comparison here. Ukraine has 20 times the population of Gaza and 1,700 times the size of Gaza. And 3 years of war, not 3 months, the number of children killed is 560, whereas it was 10,000 children, Palestinian children in Gaza. So why is the West, why is the United States unwilling to stand up and say this travesty, this crime, this genocide, this ethnic cleansing? I'm submitting a proposition here. They have valued the economic and strategic benefits to be far more important than the human lives and things. And I would not dismiss and cannot dismiss, cannot underestimate the contribution that this canal is making towards this kind of calculus, where they prefer this strategic economic benefits over human lives and the lives of women and children. If this is not enough, let me tender a third proposal that is now on the table. Americans in the G20 in New Delhi brought together the Indian government, Saudis, UAE, to agree to an alternative to the Silk Road that would go from Mumbai through Dubai, Dubai through Israel, Israel into Europe. The Americans have been trying vehemently and incessantly trying to constrain the economic opportunities of China and its influence. And this new route, trade route, to replace the Silk Road is again another very crucial alternative that being floated and trying to connect the Israelis and the Indian government and the Saudi and the UAEs in a joint interest that take them away from China and put them on a course where the economic benefits to them is above the consideration of their brotherly and the way to look together towards what they consider to be an important and and serious benefit and strategic one. And this is again gives me a chance to say that there is an intersection of interest between the American hegemon and the Israeli regional hegemon, American, the global hegemon, and the Europeans in seeing a situation where they can undermine, if this strong, constrain the economic vigor of China and being on the side with Russia, and Israelis are positioning themselves first in terms of being the supplier of gas to Europe. The second, in terms of the canal, would give complete command and veto power on the passage to Europe and the United States. And the third one is to make sure that the Chinese are not able to exercise the full benefits or take the full benefits from the trade route. But if this is not enough, let me add two things I did mention, but they became extremely important. One of which is that they're using this war and the blood of women and children as a testing lab of their weapons and their new systems and the new drones and new what they call artificial intelligence and finding things. So to a great extent, I cannot dismiss, underestimate, or minimize the economic motivation, objectives, incentives exercised by the Israelis and their collaborating partners from Europe and the United States. And if this is not enough, you could also mention they're trying to a great extent to woo the Arabs into an economic arrangement. Especially this is being played between UAE and Israel, whether it's through tourism or money laundering and many other activities. Here, the issue, instead of the Arabs getting together and reinforcing and accumulating and leveraging their economic interaction, Israel is trying to create a wedge into this and commandeer some of this, redirect some of these benefits to relationships using in a very bizarre way the Abrahamic Accord, as if all of a sudden religion now is becoming a justification for exploitation and economic material betterment. I cannot, as I said, underestimate the importance of economics. It has always been a major motivation, incentive of colonial structures, colonial systems. And that's why I felt like that one ought to delve, ought to look at what are the economic incentives or economic projects or economic benefits that could possibly explain some of this, especially the one where the Israelis have made it very clear and in a blunt way and in a very obscene way, in my view, that they have to empty Gaza of its people. They have to make Gaza unlivable. They have destroyed 80% of the infrastructure where people, and now somebody, in the government saying that we have to make sure that we control the whole area. We should get the Egyptians. There should be only us controlling any access to Gaza and should prevent them from getting any material to reconstruct. The aim here is ethnic cleansing, people transfer, and they're using the ideology where in my view, it's not one or the other, it's both. And the economic great benefits that they are thinking and planning and trying to exploit by emptying Gaza.
Well, Dr. Kubursi, this is quite a wide panoramic presentation. If I may just kindly sum up the 5 points you have mentioned, and we always need to indicate that this interview falls within the interview series program that the Cambridge Center for Palestine Studies runs, where we host internationally renowned figures such as academics, diplomats, journalists, and others to shed light, really, on the various issues at stake, and in particular, the ongoing KlenzoCide. Professor Atif, you have mentioned two separate terms or crimes. One is ethnic cleansing, and the other one is genocide. I combined them together and coined this term Klenzocide, which is specific to the Gaza Strip and Palestine. But if I may kindly just mention the 5 points so that I could ask you perhaps a couple of questions. So, Professor Kubursi, you've mentioned 5 economic factors which, to the best of your knowledge, are crucial in the current attempt to empty and flatten the Gaza Strip. One is the gas resources. The second is the alternative, Ben Gurion Canal, the alternative to the Suez Canal. The third is to minimize the importance, the economic importance at least, of China. The third has got to deal with trying arms, which is related to the arms industry, as well as AI, artificial intelligence. And finally, the final point, the 5th point, is what you have mentioned, which is related to the so-called Abrahamic Accords between the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and to a certain extent, possibly Sudan and Morocco, and the big bonanza, as we say, the big benefit which hasn't yet been materialized, which is a so-called treaty, peace treaty, or Abrahamic Accord treaty with Saudi Arabia, which many argue that the current conflict has actually stopped it. So I have got, if I may, Professor Atif, a couple of questions so that as well the researchers benefit from it, but as well as all other viewers. The first thing that one can ask is, has the excavation of gas in the Gaza shore started or not?
Well, I mean, the British group that was retained to excavate and to examine things found out that the amount of gas in these Marine 1 and Marine 2 aquifers is there. It's a substantial amount and of good quality. So it's not just purely the quantity, but also the quality. And being at the surface and so close, it doesn't take too much resources to lift it up. So to a great extent, the economic value of these has already been established. They were supposed to have really started this. And as I said, Arafat went there at one time and demonstrated that there is gas, and he lit a batch just to show this. And there was an agreement that included British Gas, the Palestinian National Authority, and the CCC. This is a group of Lebanese and Palestinian engineers, and they were committed $150 million. There are agreements and there is a bank statements and things. The issue is that they were not allowed You see, it was purely the Israelis who controlled the offshore activities. And
I understand that the CCC pulled out. This is what we read. They pulled out of the contract.
well, I mean, they pulled out when the Israelis, were preventing British gas from, generating the gas and delivering it to where they had agreed to Ashkelon. So they felt like there is no way they can put all this money and build the pipeline, $150 million, and they get nothing. Although the agreement between the Palestinians and the CCC and the British gas gave only 10% to the Palestinians and 40% to CCC, and the 50% was really to the British gas. And everybody was willing, get the gas, and then we would go back and revise this. When Hamas won the elections in 2007, first thing they wanted is to revise the agreement. They felt that the Palestinian National Authority, or the group that represent the Palestinians, getting a 10% share is too low, and therefore they wanted to change it in such a way that the Palestinians were granted a larger share in the thing. But you see, the Israelis, as always, they use the issue of terrorism as thing, saying, Sharon saying, I'm not prepared to give money to a government that Israel would be financing terrorism against it. I mean, that unwillingness of the Israelis to ever understand, appreciate, and for the world to come to grips with this idea that these forces are national liberation, that these people are reacting to a very brutal and very vicious occupation that denied the Palestinians any semblance of freedom and capacity. The Palestinians have really been living literally, as one Israeli, Jeff Halper, calls it, warehousing humanity. You put them all in one place and you give them just enough to survive. In some respect, the Palestinians who could have had these resources and sold their gas, they would have had enough resources to create industry, to finance social economic development. They were denied.
Now,
So to yeah.
yes, please go ahead.
No, I'm going to say, an answer, a short answer, that they have not been able to exploit this resource. And I'm now convinced that, I don't have strict evidence, but just only from reports of the press and other places, that the Israelis are already exploiting the gas that belonged to the Palestinians illegally, immorally, to their own benefit.
Now, here, perhaps we should ask about the role of two countries. The first one is neighboring Egypt, which has got not only peace treaty since the late 70s of the 20th century, but at least a peace treaty between the governments, and economic relations and gas contracts. But on the other, whilst Egypt has got an interest, gas interest with the Israeli occupation, on the other hand, we see that Egypt is going to be harmed from the establishment of the Ben Gurion Canal. So how do you think, if you have an idea from open sources, how do you think Egypt is going to conduct its economic policies when it has supposedly two contradicting interests? On the one hand, the gas, and on the other hand, the canal.
Yeah. This is the $100 million question, but lack of knowledge never stopped me from answering. But I think I have a few pointers here to consider. First of which, at one time, just to review a bit quickly, the historic relationship between Israel and Egypt regarding gas. At one time, Israel was using Egyptian gas. And then the situation is that the Egyptians were lifting gas at far faster rate than could be sustained. And then ultimately they were getting their gas from the Israelis. But they were getting also another benefit that nobody talks about, or not enough is talked about. Israel was lifting the gas and send it to be liquefied in Egypt. So Egypt was already getting a bit of the, I would call the crumbs, but it was getting some benefits from the find in the Levant Basin. And the issue here is that whatever Israel gives to Egypt and whatever Egypt gets from the gas is going to be very small and pale in comparison to what they would lose if a new canal is created, commandeered by Egypt, commandeered by Israel, and run by Israel. I mean, you have at stake here a not only the money, but also the stature and the importance of Egypt. Egypt sits on one of the major bottlenecks or one of the major passages between the Pacific and the Mediterranean, between Asia and Africa and the Europe and the Mediterranean. It's mind-boggling, and I think it would be short-sighted. And if I were allowed to give an advice to the Egyptians, they would be very short-sighted in looking at their gas interest without comparing it to what the opportunity cost that they would have to shoulder if they lose the importance and the uh, economic contributions of the canal.
So practically, we are talking about an internal conflict in Egypt. I understand that the harm from the Ben Gurion Canal is going to supersede the benefit from any gas deal, whether it's including the Gaza Strip or not. This takes us to the other major player, at least now, in the last 105 days of the KlenzoCide in the Gaza Strip, which is the role of Qatar. Dr. Atif, Qatar is a leading gas sheikhdom or state or country on the one hand. On the other hand, it maintains, or it has been maintaining to a certain extent, close relations with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Its main, or one of its main factions or leaders inside Hamas, they are hosted by Qatar. So what economic benefits can Qatar have from this gas resources in the Gaza Strip? Because it's clear from what you have mentioned that the economic and the political are interwoven to a certain extent. And since Qatar is not a charitable company, nor is Egypt or anyone else, how is this going to be developing, if at all?
I mean, it's as you said, it's a complex relationship, and it's an intersection between economics and politics and religion. I mean, so many factors to take into account. But let's look at one thing. Qatar has been financing Hamas. All right, much of the economic shots in the arm of Hamas had come from Qatar and come with the acquiescence and the good offices of the Israelis. Now, the Israelis' aim was basically to increase the conflict between the PNA, the Palestine National Authority, between Ramallah and between Gaza. The Israeli objective is to undermine any possibility of creating a Palestinian state. So they played this game basically, and allowed and used the conduit of Qatar money. And remember, Israelis also benefit from this, because whatever products you see the poor Palestinians use in Gaza, that financed by the Qatari government, goes back to Israel. So there is really Israel benefits from this. Qatari give the money to the Palestinians in Gaza. Palestinians in Gaza buy goods and services from Israel. So all of a sudden now there is a reverse motion here, where money comes to Qatari money comes to Gaza, goes back to Israel. All right. So this is one aspect.
Am I right in thinking that, in fact, the money that Qatar gives the government in the Gaza Strip, which is partly run by Hamas, and to a certain extent, still the PNA is maintaining many of the services, even during Hamas's ruling, or not ruling, rule. In fact, it's like a circle. Qatar gives the money to the Palestinians buy the goods from the Israeli market, so the Israelis are benefiting actually from the rule of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Am I right? Did I get it right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there is even one thing you and I don't know, but many people have talked about, is that they're already clipping some of the money. They're taking their own commission for administering, so to speak, this money as it goes. Okay. But there is also another issue, and you hinted at it, and it's absolutely right, Dr. Makram. Qatar is a gas power. I mean, its economy doesn't depend on oil as much as it depends on gas. And Qatar has always been looking at gas and how it can influence the amounts extracted and the direction where it goes. Much of
Geoeconomics, yeah.
Yeah, much of the gas from Qatar goes really into China, India, the Far East, and things. And to a great extent, it wanted at one time, Qatar, to get a pipeline that would go through Syria, Turkey, all the way to Europe, all right, which the Russians were not too happy with, as you might know. But Qatar has financed in a very substantive way also all the insurgent forces in Syria. And one of the reasons some people think that Russia came to Syria is to make sure that this pipeline never goes, because it would have competed with the gas that Russia supplies to Europe. So going to the Mediterranean, there is a gas line here that is an incentive for the Qataris to be there. They are grooming the relationship of maybe, and they have offered to exploit some of the gas finds in Marine 1, Marine 2. And they're also trying to get to Lebanon. I mean, let's look at Lebanon too. I mean, one cannot in any way dismiss this. I think the agreement that the Lebanese got with the Israelis is quite effective, in my view. And it reflects also the fact that they don't seem to have taken into account that this is a shared resource. What assurance do I have as a Lebanese that the Israelis who are in Karish, which is walking distance from where the Lebanese Kana wells are not siphoning under the water, under the deep water, some of the Lebanese things? Maybe by the 5 years, Lebanese can lift their gas. The Israelis have emptied the wells. And besides, really, the issue that is quite crucial here is that if it is a common resource, as I argued, then you should get money now. Nobody should benefit from this common resource without you getting your share. There is no way, it's written on it, or the gas is imprinted with the Israeli flag. This could be Lebanese, this could be Palestinian, this could be Egyptian, this could be Cypriot gas. It's common. Let's put the money that Israel gets now in that kitty, in that escrow fund, that everybody would benefit from it. There is no way economics could justify an individual exploitation of a common resource. It is an invitation for inequitable, inefficient way of doing it.
You know,
So there is.
yeah, Dr. Atif, you know, when the Lebanese reached this agreement, indirect agreement mediated by the Americans,
Okay.
many, in fact, asked, why does the Lebanese government reach an agreement, if only indirect, with the Israelis, whom they consider as occupiers of historical Palestine? Because even when when the Lebanese, Egyptian, Jordanians, and Syrians reached the agreements, or the truce agreement in 1949, Palestine, the main party, was not party to any agreement. Therefore, even the Israeli occupation until now, they mention that the conflict has not been concluded and it's still actually open since the partition plan adopted by the UN on the 29th of November 1947. So in a sense, there is this very interesting situation whereby all the original Palestinian sea or Mediterranean, which is full of natural resources, is not being exploited, or Palestinians are not benefiting from anything from Ras al Nakura, from the Lebanese border, down southwards to the Egyptian border, even not the Gaza Strip, which is in fact in the 1967 boundaries, i.e., which falls in the second part of Palestine, which was occupied in 67, and not in the Nakba of 1948. So my question to you is there a legal way that the Palestinians can argue or appeal to say that this is as well, at least, our natural resources, or at least we have got a share that we need to have it?
Yeah. Okay. Again, excellent question. But let me say, I mentioned two things. So let me go back and reassert that one. I said there are two coordinates to determine the share of each. First of all, there is no individual shares. This is a collective. Everybody owns in it. We decide how much each gets from it. But that resource is not Israeli. Is resource is all the parties together. And that's why I have argued, and I would continue to argue, that the implications of that Nobel Prize winner Ronald Coase theorem suggest that we should literally exploit it in common. And now, since these are parties that are not on good terms, as I said, there is no peace agreement between Lebanon and Israel. There would be a third, party to do it. Somebody, an honest broker, not necessarily the Americans. They've lost that honesty a long time ago. But there is really a situation where maybe a UN body, UNIP, or somebody, would be trusted by all the parties to do it. And I said there are two coordinates. One is the space, the geography. The other one is history. The Palestinians have a claim historically that no other party has, as long or as vehement or as clear. And that's why, this definitely, Palestinians here as a claimant party is perhaps with the justification of having one of the largest share in the region.
So practically, can the Palestinians approach any legal or UN organization to uh, argue, to request, to claim that they are party to these natural resources? Is there a legal route similar to the
Yeah,
one, say, what is it, please?
it's the International Court of Justice that
Right.
deals with state conflicts or with any contention part among states. So we are really taking the Israelis with South Africa for the genocide, but we can take it for exploitation illegally and against international law and against international humanitarian law and against human rights of the Palestinians, because the Geneva Convention, and the one before it, the Hague Convention, they all say that the occupier has no right to use the resources of the occupied except in their interest of the occupied people. The Israelis have taken, commandeered these resources for their own interest. They are financing, the Palestinian resources are financing their occupation. I'm sure there are legal grounds. I'm not a lawyer, but it is a matter of logic, and it's a very simple thing that the convention is as clear as one can be about the fact that natural resources in the occupied territories are the preserve, and the right to them is only to the people who are under occupation. The occupier is in violation of these rules and laws and should really compensate the Palestinians back.
Professor Kubursi, you are an economist, and certainly you handle academic matters as well, based on interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary approaches. Why, in your opinion, politicians hardly or practically do not talk about economic interests, and they stick to the political jargon and other discourses that are not truly compensating economic matters? I mean, you hear about political factions, about violence, about the so-called various political approaches, about terror, about state terror, but you don't really hear from them about economic interests. Why is that?
Well, I mean, look, I am a trained economist, and my training was basically and fundamentally in mathematical economics and things, but I have lived through so much to know and to recognize and to reconsider. There is no separation between economics and politics. The issue is not politics or economics, it's political economy. I mean, there is a mantra that now we can sing, that economics without politics has no fruits. Politics without economics has no roots. The two are intertwined, they're together. And the economics, there is not a single phenomenon, whatever it is, political, even religious, whatever, that does not have economic implications. And these economic factors have to be uncovered, have to always be considered as fundamental parts of any of the problem or its solution.
So practically, when we hear in the news that they are talking obviously about various layers of agreements or arrangements, be it ceasefire or who is going to rule Gaza in the next or in the post CleanzoCide conflict situation, whether it's the PNA or PA or Hamas or others, and all the involvement of Qatar or Egypt or the United States and others, all of this will not and cannot possibly be concluded without economic agreements. I know that now they are hidden or they are in the background, but in fact, there is this very important economic factor which needs to be taken into account, whether it's in the short term, medium term, or long term. Did I get this right?
You're absolutely right. And let me tell you this, any agreement should really name the party that destroyed, that completely turned into rubble the whole of Gaza. They have the obligation to rebuild it, to reconstitute it in a way that it was a viable, functional economy, even under the most dire conditions of occupation.
Professor Atif Kubursi, since we are talking about rebuilding, reconstruction, rehabilitation, obviously spiritual, mental, as well as financial. Could I just, I know it's a different topic, but your answers are very much provocative as well, or at least provokes other questions. Um, what model do you see when it comes, and it will definitely come, or most definitely come? What model of reconstruction do you see for Gaza in the near future?
Look, and I've always argued against reconstruction. Reconstruction, and typically done by people who mean well, really, but it's usually, say, non-governmental and charitable organizations, and they often want to really take a picture and they reconstitute the past. But one have an opportunity now to reconsider to what extent is the past worth reconstructing? Maybe we have an opportunity now to build a more viable, a more efficient, a more effective way. So we always have to think about not building the past, reconstructing, but reconstituting, taking all the opportunities to create the best system, that resources, and they are very scarce, that would. But I also take a clue from what you're saying that it's not just reconstruction of mortar and cement. It's reconstituting the political system, uh, the incredible damage, psychological damage this must have really inflicted on the poor people who've seen their parents and their homes destroyed on top of them. There is really here a situation where we want to revitalize, we want to reconstitute, we want to rebuild, we need to reweave. One of the major reweaving future for Gaza is to unite it with the part of Palestine that is still under occupation, the West Bank. We have to recreate, reweave these connections that have been severed. We need to reconstitute and rebuild the connections to the Arab depth that this has been severed by the Israelis. This dependence on Israel has been a very costly experiment. And any reconstitution, rebuilding of Palestine should be done as a whole. Palestine in the West Bank, Palestine in the Gaza, in the diaspora, in a way that also reconstitute a Palestinian entity as part of the Arab depth that it has always been part of.
Professor Atif, your answers and the way you present the issues is absolutely fascinating. And I cannot but ask you, please, three questions at least, since you have just mentioned the future of reconstruction, or the future in general without reconstruction, of the nearly destroyed Palestinian Gaza Strip. I'll ask you the questions in one go, and you can pick and choose whatever you wish to address. First of all, how do you envisage the new spatial policy of constructing buildings economically? One. Two, what will happen to the water resources? And thirdly, the electricity, the power. Not to mention the lack of a port, a Gaza port, which the Israeli occupation has not been allowing to be constructed, and obviously an airport, which they destroyed as well. I know five different points. I'm not sure if they are economically connected. Possibly yes, for a viable part of the future Palestinian state.
Yeah, absolutely. They're all interconnected. There is no way you can separate them. Okay, let me begin with electricity. We cannot continue to depend on being part of the Israeli grid. There is now a chance to build solar power, and Gaza has some of the highest, solar irradiation that could be harvested and with solar panels and creating an indigenous and a autonomous electricity. Water is extremely important. Nothing is more scarce than water in the Middle East, as you know, and in Gaza in particularly. Israel always intercepts the flow that would have come from the hilltops of the West Bank into Gaza. But the story here, we can also use now the technology is such that if you use solar power to electrolyze, electrolysis, you could separate hydrogen from oxygen. You could create water in the system. You could use the solar power to create desalination plants so that Gaza could have also sufficient clean water and one that could be domestically and indigenously controlled. We need to get a new buildings now. You see, look, and this is a very serious question, Dr. Makram, in the sense that it would take if the fighting stops today, and there are about 80% of the population is homeless, it would take 5 years before you could create the kind of traditional housing to replace the old one. But there are new technologies. Chinese are building buildings that are 8, 10, 12 stories high in one day. So this is a real situation where we need to explore and exploit some of the building technologies that would be more sustainable, more energy efficient, in a way that would really be in the best interest of parties. So these are interconnected, but the hallmark, the glue that puts all these things together is indigeneity, endogenous control, ability to create the kind of systems that you have the full command on, that you don't have to remain at the beck and call and enslaved to the Israeli dictates as they control your very vital fundamental resources.
Dr. Atif, again, your answer generates a couple more questions. First of all, looking at all the rubbles, which it seems they are embracing at least 10,000 bodies. It's quite a tragic scene. Have you seen before any example like this? What will they do? Will they try, while removing the rubbles, will they try to salvage, rescue the bodies or not? How long will it take? Have you got an idea what can happen?
I really have no idea on this, but I also quite sympathize with the fact that 7,000 missing people could be under the rubble. So this is a very thorny question, and I really find it very difficult to hazard an answer. But what I would really like to suggest that some of this rubble can be recycled, so that you don't have to buy cement from scratch or build it. There is really an opportunity. I know this from a fact from rebuilding, the central business district in Lebanon after all the great destruction that happened during the civil war, they were able to use some of the resources. Now, the story in Lebanon is a little bit more benign compared to what we're having here, in the sense that the buildings were basically rubble, but there were no souls and bodies in it. Here, it's a very difficult one, and I'm not going to be in any shape or form to hazard a way of how we deal it, how to deal with it. It's a very thorny question.
Yeah, and I appreciate this, but it's always good to explore new avenues, perhaps. So, in terms of recycling the cement or the concrete, are there established ways for doing this on site? Are there
Yeah,
machines?
there are technologies now that would allow you to really separate the metal from the cement, and you could really use these things. And what is also quite interesting are two fundamental aspects here. One of which is you use indigenous resources. You don't have to go and import, or you have to go and reproduce, cement from scratch. So there is really economic factors here that would allow you to use and save resources. The other one is that you depend totally solely on your ability and on your domestic factors, not to depend on importing in massive amounts these resources.
Right. This, in fact, I can think of one example which at least I witnessed partly. As you may know or remember, the Israeli occupation, when it occupied Jaffa, and just to explain, in the partition plan, the cultural and commercial economic Palestinian city of Jaffa was supposed to be in the Arab state, according to even according to the partition plan. But then the Israelis destroyed it after expelling of its 150,000 inhabitants in that district. Only 3,500 remained. But then they destroyed some of its neighborhoods, namely Al-Manshiyeh in northern Jaffa. And then they took all the rubbles and they dumped it at the shore, at the seashore, and they expanded the land. So there is now a belt where promenade now, which is built actually on the rubbles of the Palestinian Manshiyeh quarter, which inhabited around 25,000 Palestinians. Some of them are still refugees across the globe. So do you think, and maybe I'm not sure whether I'm asking too much outside your expertise, but do you think that this rubbles partly can be used in order to establish the long overdue Palestinian port in Gaza?
You see, it's definitely beyond my expertise, but I just authored a paper with a couple of engineers, structural engineers, about sustainable buildings. And one of the major arguments that we came up with this research findings is that you always have to use the 4 R's: reduce, recover, recycle. So I am in that mindset. I consider it to be crucial. This is one way where you could ensure sustainability. And there is a fantastic chance here that we could use domestic resources, recycle whatever we have, and reuse it, repurpose it in a way that will be a viable alternative to importing, and to rebuild the past on the established and the common technologies. Let's think in a innovative way and see how we could do it better and cheaper than what we had done in the past.
And finally, Dr. Atif, and since you have been a very important and leading figure in various UN agencies across Asia and the world. What role in the rebuilding? Let's leave the term reconstruction aside and adopt the term that you suggested and you are using, rebuilding. What role will the UN have in the rebuilding of the Gaza Strip and how this will work?
Well, look, the UN is definitely an important international institution, and there are five mandates. One of which, and the most important, is to avoid the Third World War, and hopefully it will succeed. So far, cross our fingers, it is. But another one is socio-economic development, and another one is sustainable environment, and another one is to eradication of poverty. We have now sustainable development goals 17. Each and every one of them is relevant to what the UN could do for Gaza, and I would take it to be an important one. But as you know, the UN is hamstrung by the five permanent members, each with a veto power. And many of us who have really been involved in trying to reform and to deal with this issue is to make this veto power pocketless, to be irrelevant when it comes to humanitarian tragedies and issues of destruction on the scale that we have seen. This is a time in which the United Nations should unite all the nations in this collective effort to build a better future, a more peaceful and a more effective one, and one that would not really bring us back into this situation that is so abhorrent. I mean, I just today saw something that brought me to tears. A doctor that I know from his family, Dr. Psisu, is operating on his daughter at the kitchen table without amputating her leg because she was hit by a bomb, without a single anesthetic. I mean, look, this is a major blemish on the face of humanity, that something like this would have happened. There is now a chance, maybe, that we could take and the UN could lead in trying to recreate a future that is different from this incredibly horrific past that we have been through.
Um, Dr. Atif, it's nearly impossible to stop this interview, but may I just kindly ask you, since you have just mentioned the medical services or the medical aspect, indeed, nobody will bring back the currently, it seems, 30,000 Palestinian victims killed in this CleanzoCide that Israel has been perpetrating in the Palestinian Gaza Strip. But if we just focus on one sector, which is the medical sector, so far we understand that 300 medical doctors and senior nurses have been killed. Normally, it takes between, it depends clearly which expertise we are talking about, whether it's a nephrologist, cardiologist, or a nurse. But if we talk and if we consider that it takes 5 years to train one medical member of staff, and if they have lost 300, so we are talking about in years that we're talking about anywhere between 1,500 years to 2,000 years of training the medical staff. Is there a way to sort of accelerate the training of new medical doctors or medical staff? Did you, economically, I'm talking, how can one do that economically with or without the UN?
Yeah, look, you mentioned 5 years. It takes more than 5 years, 10
Yeah,
years. Because
average, yeah.
you looking at 5 years to get a nurse, to get a cardiologist, specialist. It may be long, but in the short term, you could bring people from outside. I tell you, already, Médecins Sans Frontières, you know, Doctors Without Borders, uh, there been a large number of incredibly great humanitarian doctors who braved all the risks and things and are operating today in Gaza. So in the short term, you could make up for it by bringing people, volunteers. And I bet you in the Arab world, there would be thousands of people who would really feel the noble obligation to go and help. But in the end, as you said, you have to create your own. I mean, one way of doing it, and the UN and other people can do, is to build medical schools and training centers and to supply them with the required resources and expertise and machinery, equipment, and all the technologies that are now commonly used. So the issue of medical rebuilding, I would take a priority. I think it's quite important. Today, there are infectious diseases that are ravaging into the area because of unclean water, unclean sanitation, decaying bodies everywhere. The medical catastrophe is probably one of the most intense and most devastating one, and cannot be separated from that crucial devastation that we have been experiencing.
Dr. Atif, normally in the past, when we spoke in particular, despite the difference, when we spoke in particular about the destruction in Syria, I heard some economists saying that it'll take around $900 billion to rebuild Syria. Obviously, well, the destroyed parts of Syria, and I know that the Syrian government have already started 3 years ago the process of reconstruction, but Syria is a state. The government is still there, despite the five occupied pockets, some by the Israelis, the Americans, the Kurds, the ISIS-like, and the Turks, obviously. The central government is still somehow functioning, operating on large or in large parts of Syria. In the Gaza Strip currently, how would it be possible to estimate the cost of rebuilding, to use your term, rather than reconstruction? How long will it take to know at the moment the financial cost, the economic cost of rebuilding Gaza Strip?
Yeah, it's not simple, but it's not impossible task, and economists are all trained to do that. And there are two ways of really doing it. One, you look at everything that's been destroyed and try to estimate it at the cost of replacement. So, and then the other one is to take opportunity cost, is that it's not only the cost of rebuilding, but all the costs that accumulate that are not as visible as others. Like, how can you reconstruct the suffering of people? I mean, I remember that when the Israelis, when the Jews were evicted from Germany, they estimated a system, they call it Wiedergutmachen, make things good again. And one of the major costs was the cost of separating families, the cost, the psychological cost of pain. I tell you, I can easily, on the back of an envelope, maybe get you a full cost of rebuilding the infrastructure and the physical things. But what would be extremely difficult, and then this should really be imposed on those who have destroyed and created all this, is that cost of psychological, of families being separated. I mean, I look at this Dahdouh, this guy who is a journalist, lost everybody. I don't know how you can estimate the cost of the suffering and the pain that this person must go. But these are important costs that should not be glossed over in our estimation of the total cost of what this campaign of genocide and what you call it, I love it, the
KlenzoCide.
side is enormous. But it should really be part of the total tally of the total bill that we should submit to the international community and to hold Israel accountable for. That's not only the physical destruction, but the psychological destruction that went with it too.
This is quite important that obviously, as I said, you deal with the matters not only from or based on the economic paradigm, but as well as from an interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary approach. And there is no doubt that in the law, the court, one court at some point will take into account issues such as trauma, loss, deprivation, psychological distress. There will be plenty of cases of post-traumatic stress disorder, to mention but a few. And this is quite interesting because there will be many lawsuits against the Israeli occupation. And this KlenzoCide has been causing such tremendous pain and losses that it's very difficult at the moment to quantify or monetize. Well, Professor Atif Kubursi, it's been absolutely a fascinating session. I feel that I've got at least 10 more questions to ask you, but I'm sure that we will be having more sessions with you, and we very much look forward to having you back here in Cambridge. After all, you lived and you were here a senior visiting academic, literally a mile from where I am sitting. We hope to be having you again face to face and to possibly talk about much more viable and less stressful and more pleasant issues in the near future. So,
Thank you.
on behalf of the Cambridge Center for Palestine Studies, our colleagues, friends across the globe, we truly thank Professor Atif Kubursi, the internationally renowned economist, for lending us at least just nearly under 2 hours of his time, talking, I am sure, for the first time ever about a wide variety of issues, mainly related to economics, but generally to sociology, psychology, politics, and international relations, taking into account the local, national, regional, and international actors and factors. So, Professor Atif Kubursi, I thank you immensely once again, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Thank, Thank you very much, Dr. Makram. It was my pleasure. And as one person who have listened to you and attended some of your seminars, I'm very happy to be part of it.
Thank you very much. Bless you. Thank you very much.